Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. This video is intended strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. The discussion regarding legal frameworks, historical court precedents, and the socio-economic implications of domestic law does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Matrimonial law varies significantly by jurisdiction. Viewers should conduct their own due diligence and consult with a qualified professional regarding their specific circumstances. Imagine walking into a courtroom where the very definition of a broken home is about to be rewritten by a single case file. In the landscape of American jurisprudence, there are numbers that represent more than just a docket entry. They represent a seismic shift in how a superpower views the sanctity of the contract known as marriage. We are looking at a phenomenon that redefined the American nuclear family and sent shockwaves through the middle class, affecting everything from real estate markets to the way the next generation views commitment. Most people believe that the breakdown of the American family was a slow, inevitable fade, but historical trends suggest it was catalyzed by specific legal pivots and cultural tipping points that many are still afraid to talk about. This is the deep dive into the cultural impact of Divorce 661, a deep-seated analysis of how a specific legal momentum changed the trajectory of the United States forever. If you think you understand why the divorce rate peaked and how it reshaped the American psyche, you are only seeing the surface. We are peeling back the layers on the economic fallout, the psychological restructuring of the youth, and the silent transformation of the American dream. Today, we are solving the mystery of the modern relational disconnect. For the American viewer, understanding this history is not just a lesson in the past. It is a roadmap to understanding your own family tree, your financial vulnerabilities, and the societal pressures that dictate your personal life today. By the end of this masterclass, you will possess a high-level understanding of the legislative shifts that moved us from fault-based restrictive societies to the era of no-fault autonomy, and more importantly, how those shifts created a trillion-dollar industry that thrives on the dissolution of the domestic unit. To understand the weight of this impact, we have to look at the baseline of the mid-20th century. Before the era of widespread legal reform, marriage in the United States was viewed primarily as a social stabilizer and an economic necessity. Divorce was not just a legal hurdle, it was a social death sentence. In many states, you could not simply leave a marriage because you were unhappy or unfulfilled. You had to prove a specific violation of the contract. This often led to theatrical court cases where couples would manufacture evidence of adultery or abandonment just to satisfy a judge. Case studies from this era show a repressed society where the stay for the children mentality was the only socially acceptable path. However, beneath that surface, a pressure cooker was building. The introduction of specific legal frameworks, often categorized under the umbrella of the 661 type reforms, represented a radical departure. It moved the burden of proof away from fault and toward irreconcilable differences. While this was framed as a liberation of the individual, the macrocultural impact was far more complex than anyone predicted at the time. When the legal floodgates opened, the United States saw a spike in filings that didn't just represent unhappy couples finally getting out. It represented a fundamental shift in the American perception of permanence. Let's look at the data points regarding the contagion effect. Sociologists have noted through historical trends that when a major legal shift like this occurs in a community, divorce becomes a social contagion. When one family on a suburban block utilized these new legal pathways, the perceived cost of exit for the surrounding families dropped significantly. This led to a rapid restructuring of the American neighborhood. We saw the rise of the single-parent household, not as an anomaly, but as a standard demographic. The economic implications are where the deep dive truly begins. In the wake of these cultural shifts, the American housing market had to pivot. Previously, the starter home was designed for a nuclear family of 4. Post-reform, we see a massive surge in the demand for multi-unit housing and smaller dwellings, as one household effectively split into 2. This wasn't just a change in living arrangements, it was a massive transfer of wealth. Potential outcomes of these splits often included the liquidation of the primary asset, the family home, which, during the 1970s and 80s, was the primary vehicle for middle-class wealth accumulation. This led to what economists call the feminization of poverty, where the economic fallout disproportionately affected women who had been out of the workforce, while simultaneously creating a new class of commuter fathers who were financially tethered to their past while trying to build a future. Furthermore, we must examine the psychological impact on the generation of the shift. Children who grew up during the peak of this cultural transition became the architects of the modern hookup culture and the delayed marriage trends we see in the 2020s. By observing the high-stakes dissolution of their parents' assets and emotional stability, a massive segment of the U.S. population developed a risk-averse approach to legal commitment. This is why we see the rise of the prenuptial agreement, not as a tool for the wealthy, but as a standard defensive maneuver for the modern professional. Consider the case study of the silver divorce trend, a direct descendant of the early reforms. We are now seeing couples who stayed together for 30 or 40 years finally utilizing these legal pathways in their 60s and 70s. This has created a secondary cultural impact, the destabilization of retirement. When assets are split at age 65, the potential outcomes for long-term care and legacy building are halved. This puts a massive strain on the U.S. social safety net, as the informal care previously provided by a spouse is replaced by state-funded or private-pay professional care. The impact also extends into the realm of the American workforce. Human resource data from the late 20th century shows a direct correlation between the rise of these legal shifts and changes in employee productivity. A divorce is not a one-day event. It is a multi-year administrative and emotional marathon. The Divorce 661 era introduced a period where the American office became the primary support system for individuals going through the legal wringer. Employers had to adapt to flex time and mental health support long before these were standard corporate buzzwords, simply because so much of their workforce was navigating the fallout of a broken contract. As we go deeper into this 10-part series, we will break down the specific legislative language that made this possible, the divorce industrial complex that grew out of it, comprising lawyers, mediators, and forensic accountants, and how you can navigate the modern landscape where the happily ever after narrative has been replaced by contractual sustainability. We are looking at a total transformation of the American identity. We went from a society of we to a society of me, and the legal code was the engine driving that change. In the next sections, we will explore the custody wars of the 1990s, where the cultural impact shifted from the parents to the legal rights of the child, creating a new framework for best interests that still dominates our family courts today. We will analyze the data on how different states handled these shifts, creating a divorce tourism map of the U.S. where your zip code determined your financial future. This isn't just history. It is the current reality of the American legal and social fabric. We are living in the world that these reforms built, and understanding the why is the only way to protect your how in the future. We are moving past the slogans and into the gritty reality of the numbers, the laws, and the lives changed forever by this movement. To understand the depth of this shift, we must look at how the machinery of the American legal system actually functions when a marriage hits the breaking point. It is easy to talk about cultural impact in the abstract, but for the average American family in 2026, the impact is measured in dollars, cents, and hours of lost time. Imagine a typical middle-class professional named Mark. In 2026, Mark represents a significant demographic in the United States. The high-earning, asset-heavy individual navigating a legal landscape that was fundamentally altered by the streamlined, often remote, and efficiency-focused frameworks like those popularized by the Divorce 661 model. Mark has spent 15 years building a career in the tech sector. He has a 401k, a mortgage on a suburban home in a high-growth area like North Carolina or Texas, and perhaps most importantly in 2026, a portfolio of digital assets including various cryptocurrencies and fractional real estate investments. When Mark and his spouse decide to part ways, they aren't just ending a relationship. They are initiating a forensic audit of a decade and a half of shared economic life. In the pre-661 era, this process could take years and tens of thousands of dollars in billable hours. Today, the cultural impact of these streamlined services means that the expectation of a quick surgical exit has become the new norm. This shift toward efficiency has created what sociologists call the commodification of closure. Because services like Divorce 661 allow for flat fee, remote processing, the barrier to entry for ending a marriage has never been lower. Historical trends show that when the cost and complexity of a procedure decrease, its frequency often increases. For the American public, this means that divorce is no longer seen as a catastrophic failure, but as a manageable administrative transition. This has a profound effect on the psychology of the middle class. We are seeing a move away from the high-conflict courtroom drama toward a more sterile business-like dissolution. While this reduces immediate trauma, some researchers argue it also reduces the perceived gravity of the marital contract itself. However, the reality of the 2026 legal landscape is that while the paperwork may be faster, the assets are infinitely more complex. One of the most significant case studies we are seeing involves the tracing of digital wealth. In the 1990s, hiding an asset meant a secret bank account or cash under a mattress. Today, it involves digital wallets, gift card churning, and online credits. Despite the streamlined nature of modern filings, the discovery phase has become a high-stakes game of digital forensics. Case studies from recent years show that even in amicable filings, the presence of volatile assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum can stall a settlement for months. The cultural impact here is a new kind of financial paranoia within American marriages. People are entering unions with a dual mindset, building a life together while simultaneously maintaining a digital footprint that is easily partitioned if things go south. This brings us to the rise of the specialized legal industry that caters to this efficiency. The Divorce 661 model has forced traditional law firms to pivot. If a paralegal service can finalize a judgment for a fraction of the cost, high-priced attorneys must justify their existence through high-level strategy and complex asset protection. This has created a bifurcated system in the United States. On one side, you have the fast-track divorce for the masses, remote, automated, and standardized. On the other, you have precision litigation for the high-net-worth individual. This legal stratification is deepening the wealth gap in post-divorce outcomes. Historical trends from the U.S. Census Bureau indicate that women still face a more significant economic downturn following a split. Even with modern efficiencies, the gendered division of labor remains a ghost in the machine. Imagine if a stay-at-home mother in 2026, who has spent 10 years managing the household and child-rearing, enters this streamlined system. The speed of a 661 style divorce can sometimes work against the partner who needs more time for asset discovery, or who is less familiar with the family's digital finances. The cultural push for fast and amicable can inadvertently pressure the more vulnerable spouse into a settlement that doesn't account for the long-term loss of earning potential. Furthermore, we are seeing the emergence of parallel parenting as the gold standard for high-conflict scenarios in 2026. This is a direct response to the failure of the co-parenting ideal of the early 2000s. Parallel parenting acknowledges that some couples simply cannot collaborate. Instead of forced interaction, the legal framework now prioritizes total separation of domains. One parent is the primary decision-maker for education, the other for medical issues. Communication happens through encrypted, court-monitored apps rather than face-to-face. This is a massive cultural shift. We are effectively engineering a way for people to be parents together without ever having to acknowledge each other's existence. The data also points to a fascinating shift in the gray divorce demographic. Americans over the age of 50 are utilizing these streamlined legal services at record rates. For this group, the cultural impact isn't about starting over. It is about unbundling a lifetime of shared history before the final chapters of life. The efficiency of modern divorce allows this demographic to pivot quickly, but the potential outcomes for their retirement are stark. When a pension or a lifetime of Social Security credits is split at 68, the margin for error is zero. We are seeing a new class of solo seniors who are culturally liberated but economically precarious, a trend that is already beginning to reshape the American healthcare and housing industries. To truly understand why this matters to you today, we have to look at the marital horizon of the next generation. Younger Americans are watching these trends and responding with what we call strategic restraint. They are marrying later, if at all, and they are doing so with a level of legal literacy that would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. They aren't just looking for a partner. They are looking for a co-signatory who understands the exit strategy before the entrance is even made. The cultural impact of Divorce 661 isn't just about how marriages end, it is fundamentally changing how they begin. The legal machinery is now so well-oiled that the friction of leaving is almost gone. But as any physicist will tell you, friction is also what keeps things from sliding away. By removing the difficulty of the process, have we inadvertently removed the incentive to stay? Or have we simply created a more honest society where the exit is as accessible as the entrance? The answer lies in the massive, often hidden, transfer of wealth that happens every time a final judgment is stamped by a remote court clerk. But here is where the story takes a turn that most people don't see coming. While the legal process has become more efficient, the social fallout has become more fragmented. We are moving into an era where your divorce is no longer a public scandal, but a private data point. And that data point is being used by institutions you might not expect. From insurance companies to credit bureaus, the status change in your life triggers a cascade of algorithmic shifts that can affect your purchasing power for decades. You might think that once the papers are signed and the flat fee is paid, you are free. But in the modern American economy, the 661 effect is just the beginning of a long-term financial recalibration. What happens when your amicable split triggers a tax audit you weren't prepared for? What happens when the AI tools used to divide your assets miss a crucial piece of the puzzle? The next part of our deep dive focuses on the industrial complex behind the curtain, the unseen players who profit from every signature. We are going to look at the data brokers and the specialized lenders who have turned the American divorce into a high-yield investment vehicle. If you thought this was just about family law, you are about to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Prepare yourself, because in Part 3, we are exposing the shadow economy of the American split. The shadow economy of the American split is not just a collection of legal fees. It is a sophisticated, multi-layered financial ecosystem that views a family's dissolution as a supply chain opportunity. In 2026, when a couple engages in a streamlined process like the Divorce 661 model, they are often unaware that they have triggered a massive data harvesting apparatus. Historical trends suggest that for every dollar spent on a flat-fee document service, there are hundreds more moving in the background, fueled by the monetization of the family unit's fragmentation. Imagine if a couple, let's call them Sarah and David, decides to end their marriage in a high-tech hub like Austin. They choose a remote, fixed-fee service because it fits their modern, efficiency-first lifestyle. They think they are saving money, and on the surface the legal bill is manageable. However, the moment they begin their filing, their digital footprint is categorized. In the United States today, major credit bureaus and data brokers have developed specialized algorithms that track indicators of a domestic split. A sudden change in address for one spouse, a spike in credit card usage for household goods, or the opening of a new solo checking account signals a life event. This information is sold to a variety of players. For instance, mortgage lenders and real estate algorithms identify David as a potential seller of a 4-bedroom suburban home, and Sarah as a potential buyer or renter of a new, smaller dwelling. This is not a coincidence. It is the precision targeting of the post-divorce market. Case studies show that the divorce-induced move is one of the most profitable triggers for the American housing industry. In 2026, AI-driven marketing can predict the exact moment David will need a moving company or Sarah will need to furnish a second apartment for the children's weekend stays. But the shadow economy goes deeper than just marketing. We have to discuss the rise of divorce litigation funding. While Sarah and David might be opting for a simple process, many others in the middle and upper middle class are finding themselves in scenarios where assets are complex and cash is tied up. This has given birth to a specialized class of hedge funds and private equity groups that provide high-interest loans specifically for divorce proceedings. They lend money to a spouse who lacks liquidity, often the stay-at-home parent, in exchange for a percentage of the final settlement. Potential outcomes of this arrangement are mixed. It provides legal access to the under-resourced spouse, but it also turns the domestic contract into a tradable financial asset. This institutionalization of the American split creates a scenario where third-party investors have a direct financial interest in the outcome of a family's private struggle. Step by step, the wealth extraction continues through the forensic accounting layer. In 2026, the complexity of the average American's financial life, interwoven with stock options, digital currencies, and home equity lines of credit, means that even an amicable split requires a high degree of technical scrutiny. Specialized firms now offer conflict-free valuation services. They aren't lawyers. They are data analysts who use proprietary software to scrape years of banking history, looking for patterns that might suggest hidden assets or wasteful dissipation of marital funds. This layer of the economy thrives on the lack of trust that often persists even in modern divorces. We also must consider the hidden costs of the American bureaucratic friction. Even with streamlined 661-style filings, the United States remains a patchwork of jurisdictional rules. In 2026, we see the emergence of interstate mediators, professionals who specialize in cases where one parent lives in California and the other in Florida, each subject to radically different child support calculations and tax implications. The cost of navigating these state-to-state disparities is a multi-billion-dollar niche. These professionals don't just solve problems. They manage a permanent state of logistical complexity that the American legal system has yet to fully harmonize. Furthermore, the benefit cliff represents a silent economic impact that few discuss. When Sarah and David file their papers, they may inadvertently disqualify themselves from certain tax credits or insurance bundles that were designed for the traditional nuclear family. The potential outcomes include a sharp rise in individual premiums and a loss of household-scale tax efficiencies. In the United States, the tax code is historically biased toward the married unit. Splitting that unit in 2026 often triggers a single filing penalty that can cost a family thousands of dollars annually in lost deductions. To understand the macro scale, imagine the cumulative effect of these millions of microtransactions. Each divorce in the U.S. represents a liquidation event for a small business, the household. When you liquidate a business, there are always middlemen who take a cut. The 661 style efficiency models have made the liquidations faster, but they haven't necessarily made them cheaper when you factor in the long-term economic friction. Case studies from the financial sector in 2026 reveal that life event banking is now a standard department in major institutions. These departments are tasked with identifying the moment a household splits and immediately offering high-interest consolidation loans to handle the debt that almost inevitably follows the division of assets. They know that a person in the middle of a legal transition is often more focused on immediate survival than long-term interest rates. This is the definition of the shadow economy, a system that profitizes the vulnerability of a family in transition. As we move forward in this deep dive, we have to ask, who is the ultimate winner in this new landscape? Is it the individual who finds a faster exit? Or is it the network of insurers, lenders, and data brokers who have turned the end of a marriage into a recurring revenue stream? The cultural impact isn't just that Americans are divorcing differently. It's that the American divorce has been successfully integrated into the gears of global capital. You might think you are just filling out forms to move on with your life, but you are actually providing the raw material for a massive financial engine. What happens when your personal heartbreak becomes a predictable line item in a corporate quarterly report? And more importantly, how can you protect your financial future when the system is designed to extract value from your most difficult moments? In the next part, we are going deeper into the algorithm of alimony. We will look at the automated systems that now decide the fate of your future income, and the shocking data on how no-fault has evolved into no safety net for millions of Americans. If you think the math of a split is straightforward, Part 4 will prove you wrong. We are going to look at the secret formulas that judges and AI mediators are using in 2026 to divide the American future. The transition from human negotiation to the algorithm of alimony is perhaps the most profound cultural shift in the 2026 American legal landscape. We often like to believe that justice is a result of a judge's wisdom or a mediator's empathy. But in the era of Divorce 661 and AI-driven family law, the future of your bank account is increasingly determined by a cold, hard spreadsheet. Imagine if every year of your marriage, every sacrifice for a promotion, and every dollar spent on a home renovation was distilled into a series of weighted variables in a software program. This is the reality of modern maintenance and support calculations in the United States. To understand how this works, we have to look at the step-by-step logic of a 2026 support algorithm. Let's take a case study. A professional couple in a high cost of living state. The surveillance of support is the invisible net that tightens around the American household the second the final decree is stamped. In 2026, the transition from being a married taxpayer to a single payer or recipient of support triggers a level of institutional scrutiny that most citizens equate with a high-level security clearance. This is not hyperbole. It is the mechanical reality of the state disbursement units and the federal parent locator service. We are entering an era where your privacy is the price of your independence. To understand the step-by-step mechanics of this dragnet, we must look at the Financial Institution Data Match System, commonly known as FIDM. Imagine a character named Marcus. Marcus is a mid-level manager at a logistics firm in Ohio. He has just finalized his divorce using a streamlined 661 style process. He believes that as long as he sends his monthly check, his financial life remains his own. He is mistaken. Under current U.S. federal mandates, every single quarterly period, state agencies transmit the names and social security numbers of individuals with support orders to every major financial institution in the country. This includes banks, credit unions, and even brokerage firms. The system performs an automated cross-reference. If Marcus opens a secret high-yield savings account or receives a sudden inheritance that he hasn't disclosed, the system flags it in real time. In 2026, this has evolved into the integrated surveillance model. Historical trends show that agencies are moving away from quarterly checks to real-time API access. The cultural impact is a total erosion of financial anonymity. Marcus isn't just paying support. He is living in a glass house where the state has a permanent key to his ledger. But the surveillance doesn't stop at the bank vault. Let us examine the new hire reporting requirement. In 2026, the United States has the most sophisticated employment tracking system in its history. Every time Marcus takes a side gig or starts a new consulting project, his employer is required by law to report his Social Security number to the State Directory of New Hires within 20 days. This data is then immediately funneled into the National Directory of New Hires. The purpose is simple: immediate wage garnishment. For the American public, this means that the concept of under-the-table income is effectively dead. The system is designed to ensure that the algorithm we discussed in the last section is fed before Marcus even sees his first paycheck. Imagine a scenario where Marcus decides to take a vacation or buy a new car. In 2026, the State Department and the Department of Motor Vehicles are fully integrated into the support surveillance web. If Marcus falls behind on his calculated obligations, even by a relatively small margin, the system can automatically trigger a passport denial or a driver's license suspension. This is a form of digital incarceration. You are free to move, but only if your digital ledger is balanced. This creates a high-stakes cultural environment where the fear of a technical glitch in the state's data center is a constant source of anxiety for millions of American men and women. Case studies from recent enforcement actions show that even professional licenses are now on the line. If a nurse, a lawyer, or a commercial driver in 2026 fails to satisfy the automated enforcement triggers, their ability to earn a living can be revoked in an afternoon. This creates a death spiral effect where the system, in its pursuit of support funds, accidentally destroys the individual's capacity to generate those funds. The cultural impact is a class of workers who are perpetually compliant, not out of a sense of moral duty, but out of a sheer necessity to maintain their professional existence. Now let's look at the private enforcement sector. Because state agencies are often overwhelmed, a secondary industry of private bounty hunters has emerged in 2026. These are forensic data firms that use the same tools as private investigators to track spending patterns. They monitor social media for signs of an undisclosed lifestyle. If Marcus posts a photo of himself at a luxury resort while claiming he cannot afford an increase in support, these firms capture that metadata, verify the expenditure through credit card processors, and present it as evidence in a modification hearing. The U.S. public is essentially being policed by an automated, crowdsourced surveillance network that turns every Instagram post into a potential legal exhibit. Furthermore, we must address the impact of interagency data sharing. In 2026, the IRS and the Social Security Administration share a seamless loop with family court systems. This means that your tax return is no longer a private matter between you and the Treasury. Any refund you are owed can be intercepted before it ever hits your account. This intercept culture has led to a fascinating shift in how Americans manage their withholdings. People are intentionally over-withholding or underreporting to try and stay below the radar. But the AI-driven audit tools of 2026 are specifically tuned to look for post-divorce financial anomalies. Step by step, we are seeing the end of the individual. In the eyes of the 2026 American legal system, a person with a 661 style support order is no longer a sovereign actor. They are a responsible party in a perpetual state of audit. This has led to the rise of what sociologists call financial ghosting, where individuals move entirely into the gray economy, using cash or untraceable barter systems, simply to reclaim a sense of agency. However, as we move closer to a cashless society, the potential outcomes for those trying to ghost the system become increasingly grim. This surveillance web also has a chilling effect on new relationships. Imagine if you are dating Marcus in 2026. You aren't just dating a man. You are dating his legal and financial shadow. Any commingled assets, any joint bank accounts, or even a co-signed lease can potentially bring you into the orbit of the state's enforcement tools. We are seeing a cultural trend where living together apart is becoming the preferred model for post-divorce Americans, purely as a defensive maneuver to protect the new partner from the surveillance of the old life. We have built a system that is incredibly efficient at moving money, but at what cost to the American psyche? We are living in a society where your most intimate failures are tracked with the same precision as a global supply chain. The data centers are humming 24/7, cross-referencing your grocery receipts with your support obligations, ensuring that the formula is satisfied at every turn. But what happens when the system makes a mistake? What happens when the algorithm of alimony, we talked about in Part 4, and the surveillance web of Part 5 collide with the reality of the American healthcare crisis. Because as much as the state can track your money, it struggles to track your health. In the next part, we are going to dive into the medicalization of matrimony. We are going to look at how the high-stakes stress of the American split is creating a silent health epidemic, and how the insurance companies are responding to the divorce health risk profile. If you think your body is separate from your legal battle, Part 6 will show you exactly how the stress of the 661 era is being written into the DNA of the next generation. We are looking at the literal body count of the American divorce. The medicalization of matrimony and its subsequent dissolution is a phenomenon that healthcare providers in 2026 are only beginning to categorize with clinical precision. When we discuss the body count of the American divorce, we are not speaking metaphorically. We are analyzing the physiological tax that the 661 era is extracting from the American population. In the United States today, the stress of a domestic split is no longer viewed just as an emotional hurdle. It is recognized as a chronic health event with long-term potential outcomes that rival major cardiovascular incidents. To understand the step-by-step biological degradation that occurs during a legal split, we have to look at the endocrine system. Imagine a character named Chloe. Chloe is a 38-year-old nurse practitioner in Florida who is navigating a high-speed, 661-style divorce. While the legal paperwork is moving with streamlined efficiency, Chloe's body is trapped in a state of hyperarousal. In 2026, clinical researchers use the term marital transition stress, or MTS. When Chloe receives a notification on her phone from a court-monitored app or an automated alimony update, her adrenal glands secrete a surge of cortisol and adrenaline. In a standard fight-or-flight scenario, these levels would normalize after the threat passes. However, in the multi-year endurance match of a modern American divorce, Chloe's cortisol levels never return to baseline. Historical trends in U.S. health data suggest that this prolonged cortisol exposure leads to what is known as allostatic load. This is the literal wear and tear on the body that accumulates when an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. For Chloe, this manifests as telomere shortening, a biological marker of accelerated aging. In 2026, case studies from the insurance industry show that individuals going through a divorce have a statistically significant increase in the development of autoimmune disorders and inflammatory markers. The body, in its attempt to process the legal and financial instability, begins to attack its own systems. Furthermore, we must address the sleep epidemic associated with the 661 era. In the United States, sleep is the first casualty of the split. The logistical nightmare of maintaining two households, managing parallel parenting schedules, and surviving the financial surveillance we discussed in Part 5 leads to chronic insomnia. Case studies from 2026 highlight that this lack of restorative sleep creates a feedback loop. Sleep deprivation impairs the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function and decision-making. This means that exactly when Chloe needs to be her sharpest to navigate her legal and financial future, her brain is functionally operating as if she were intoxicated. This leads to poor legal decisions, which leads to more stress, creating a downward spiral that is written into her medical record. The cultural impact of this health crisis is now being reflected in the American workplace. In 2026, large-scale employers are noticing a surge in presenteeism among employees going through domestic transitions. These are workers who are physically at their desks but are mentally and biologically compromised. The potential outcomes for the U.S. economy are staggering, with billions of dollars in lost productivity attributed to the health fallout of the family court system. We are seeing a shift where major corporations are now offering divorce wellness programs and specialized mental health benefits, not out of altruism, but because the biological cost of the American split has become a corporate liability. But the most haunting aspect of the body count is what we call the intergenerational epigenetic transfer. In 2026, we are looking at the children of the 661 era, the generation that grew up while the algorithm of alimony was being perfected. Imagine Chloe's children, observing the sterile, automated nature of their parents' separation. Research into adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, has expanded to include high-conflict litigious environments. Even in cases where physical violence is absent, the chronic stress of the domestic environment during a 661-style split can alter a child's gene expression. These children are showing higher baseline levels of anxiety and a predisposed sensitivity to stress that they will carry into their adult lives in 2026 and beyond. Let us examine the medicalization of debt as well. In the United States, the financial surveillance and automated enforcement discussed in Part 5 create a state of financial fragility that has direct health consequences. When Marcus or Chloe sees their bank account balance fluctuate due to a court-ordered intercept, the physical response is identical to a physical assault. In 2026, medical professionals are beginning to link support payment anxiety to specific types of tension headaches and gastrointestinal distress. The state's efficiency in moving money is, in many ways, an efficiency in moving stress from one body to another. Insurance companies in 2026 are responding to this by adjusting their risk models. If you are a single person in the midst of a multi-year legal battle over assets, you are now categorized in a different risk bracket than a married individual or someone who has completed the transition. The divorce penalty is moving out of the legal realm and into the actuarial realm. Your premiums may reflect your legal status because the data shows you are a higher risk for a heart attack, a stroke, or a major depressive episode. This is the ultimate cultural impact. Your legal status is becoming a biological diagnostic. Case studies of post-divorce health recovery show that it takes the average American between 3 to 5 years for their biological markers to return to a pre-divorce baseline. However, in the 661 era, where the surveillance is constant and the enforcement is automated, many never reach that baseline. They live in a permanent state of residual stress, which shortens life expectancy. When we talk about the American divorce, we have to talk about the missing years of life that are being traded for legal closure and financial distribution. Step by step, the U.S. healthcare system is being burdened by a social phenomenon. We are treating the symptoms, the high blood pressure, the anxiety, the insomnia, without addressing the systemic legal friction that causes them. We have optimized the law for speed and efficiency, but we have ignored the biological capacity of the human beings caught in the gears. Chloe is not just a nurse practitioner. She is a data point in a national health crisis that is hidden in plain sight. This brings us to a terrifying question. If the process of dissolving a marriage in 2026 is this taxing on the human body, why is the system designed to be so relentless? We have created a machine that tracks every penny but ignores the person. As we move into the next part of this deep dive, we are going to look at the digital graveyard of the American family. We are going to explore how the internet and social media have turned your private tragedy into a public, permanent archive. What happens when your most painful health struggles and legal battles are indexed by search engines and analyzed by third-party algorithms for the rest of your life? In Part 7, we are exposing the permanence of the digital decree, how the internet ensures that you never truly move on, and how your data is being used to predict your next failure. If you thought the surveillance ended with your bank account, you haven't seen the social credit side of the American split. We are going into the algorithms that are blacklisting the divorced American from the future they are trying to build. The permanence of the digital decree is a concept that every American in 2026 must confront, yet few truly grasp the magnitude of its reach. We are living in an era where the traditional notion of a fresh start has been rendered obsolete by the sheer velocity and durability of data indexing. In the United States today, when a case file associated with the Divorce 661 framework is uploaded to a county portal, it doesn't just sit in a basement file cabinet. It becomes raw material for a global information economy. This is the transition from a private legal event to a public, permanent digital asset. To understand the step-by-step process of this digital haunting, let us look at the mechanics of public record scraping. Imagine a character named Julian. Julian is a mid-level executive in a logistics firm based in Chicago. In 2026, Julian completes a streamlined, no-fault divorce. He pays his fees, signs his digital documents, and believes that the chapter is closed. However, within milliseconds of his final decree being entered into the circuit court's digital repository, third-party data aggregators have already captured the metadata. This includes his name, his former spouse's name, the date of filing, and in many jurisdictions, the specific financial terms of the split. Historical trends indicate that these aggregators sell this information to a variety of entities, including background check companies, lead generators for predatory lenders, and even specialized marketing firms. For Julian, the cultural impact is a loss of narrative control. When a prospective employer in 2026 runs a standard deep web scan, they don't just see Julian's professional accolades, they see the shadow of his domestic litigation. Even if the split was amicable, the mere presence of a 661-style filing can be interpreted by risk assessment algorithms as a marker of potential instability. This is the birth of the digital stigma. a permanent record that follows the American professional into every interview and every promotion cycle. Now, let us examine the social credit side of the American split. While the United States does not have a formal state-mandated social credit system, the private sector has created a functional equivalent through algorithmic reputation scoring. In 2026, companies like VeriSign and TrustLink use AI to analyze a person's public history to determine their reliability for high-stakes contracts. Case studies show that individuals with active or recent domestic litigation are often flagged as high risk for certain types of insurance, luxury rentals, and even executive-level security clearances. Imagine Julian trying to rent a high-end apartment in a new city to facilitate his fresh start. The landlord uses a tenant screening tool that pulls from these digital decree databases. The algorithm notes that Julian's income is currently subject to a 661-style support order. Even though Julian earns a significant salary, the software perceives a threat to his future liquidity. Potential outcomes for Julian include being denied the lease or being forced to pay a significantly higher security deposit. The system isn't blacklisting Julian because he is a bad person. It is blacklisting him because he is a statistically volatile data point. This is the algorithm of exclusion, and it is reshaping the American middle class into two tiers: those with clean digital histories and those with the perpetual baggage of a domestic filing. Furthermore, we must address the social media echo chamber. In 2026, the internet does not forget. Even if Julian is careful with his privacy settings, the interconnected nature of modern platforms ensures that his past is always a few clicks away. We are seeing a rise in what sociologists call digital archaeology, where potential romantic partners or business associates dig through years of metadata to find evidence of past litigation. The cultural impact is a state of permanent transparency. In the era of Divorce 661, the legal system's focus on speed and transparency has inadvertently created a public record that is too easy to find and impossible to delete. The U.S. public is also facing the rise of reputation management extortion. In 2026, predatory websites scrape court records and create SEO-optimized pages for every person involved in a divorce. If you search for Julian's name, the first result might be a link to a site detailing his 661 filing, complete with a mugshot-style header, and a request for a fee to have the information removed. While this practice is under legal scrutiny, the jurisdictional loopholes of the internet make it a persistent threat. Julian is effectively being held hostage by his own public record. Step by step, the permanence of the digital decree creates a psychological condition known as permanent visibility. For the American citizen in 2026, there is no away to go to. Every mistake, every legal dispute, and every financial restructuring is etched into the silicon of the web. This leads to a culture of hyperconformity, where people stay in unhappy or even unhealthy relationships not out of love, but out of fear of the digital fallout. They understand that a 661 filing is not just a legal exit, it is a permanent mark on their digital skin. Case studies from recent U.S. litigation show that even the right to be forgotten remains an elusive dream for most. While some states have introduced legislation to seal records in certain cases, the sheer number of mirror sites and data caches means that once a piece of information is public for even an hour, it is effectively permanent. The potential outcomes for the next generation are even more stark. Children of the 661 era will grow up in a world where their parents' domestic disputes are a matter of public record, searchable by their future peers and employers. Let us look at the intersection of AI and these digital archives. In 2026, large language models are being trained on public datasets that include court records. This means that an AI recruiter might not even look at Julian's file. The AI has already factored his legal history into its predictive model for his future performance. The machine doesn't see a human being going through a life transition. It sees a pattern of conflict that it has been trained to avoid. This is the shadow blacklist that is currently being built in the servers of Silicon Valley. For the American public, the 661 era has moved us from a society that values the clean slate to a society that demands total recall. We have sacrificed the human need for privacy on the altar of administrative efficiency and open data transparency. Julian might find a way to balance his checkbook and manage his support payments, but he will spend the rest of his life managing the digital echoes of a decision made in a single year. This brings us to the ultimate question of this masterclass. Is the efficiency of a streamlined divorce worth the permanent digital shadow it creates? We have optimized the exit, but we have made the aftermath eternal. As we move into the next phase, we are going to look at the corporate colonization of the American family. We are going to explore how big tech and big law are teaming up to turn your private life into a subscription model. What happens when your legal rights are behind a paywall? What happens when your ability to see your children depends on a software update? In Part 8, we are breaking down the subscription to sanity, the rise of the managed matrimony industry. If you think the 661 process was the end of your interactions with the legal system, you are about to see how the industry is trying to keep you as a customer for life. We are looking at the recurring revenue of the broken heart. The subscription to sanity is the term experts are using in 2026 to describe the pivot of the American legal and tech sectors from one-time service providers to lifetime stakeholders in your domestic instability. In the traditional model of the 20th century, a divorce was a discrete event. You hired a lawyer, you went to court, and you received a final decree. Today, the cultural impact of the 661-style efficiency model has transformed that final decree into an entry point for a recurring revenue ecosystem. The industry has realized that the most profitable customer is not the one who leaves, but the one who remains in a state of perpetual, managed conflict. To understand the step-by-step monetization of post-divorce life, we must look at the mandatory integration of co-parenting software platforms. Imagine a character named Samantha, a project manager in Seattle. As part of her 2026 divorce settlement, the court mandates that all communication with her former spouse must occur through a specific, licensed application. On the surface, this is marketed as a tool for safety and organization. However, these platforms operate on a subscription model. If Samantha fails to pay her monthly fee, she loses access to the calendar that coordinates her children's school pickups and medical appointments. In the United States, we have effectively privatized the enforcement of custody orders, placing a paywall between a parent and the right to coordinate their child's life. Historical trends show that these platforms are expanding their feature sets to include premium tiers. For an additional monthly fee, Samantha can access AI-driven tone checkers that analyze her messages to ensure she isn't violating a non-disparagement clause. There are even Tier 2 services that provide automated forensic accounting of shared expenses. The potential outcomes of this system are profound. The state has outsourced the role of the mediator to a software-as-a-service provider. This creates a cultural environment where your ability to maintain a peaceful, law-abiding post-divorce existence is directly tied to your monthly subscription status. This is the managed matrimony industry, and in 2026, it is a multi-billion-dollar sector of the U.S. economy. Now, let us examine the subscription to financial compliance. As we discussed in Part 5, the surveillance of support is absolute. In response, a new class of fintech startups has emerged to sit between the payer and the state. Let us look at a character named Robert, an engineer in Silicon Valley. Robert uses a specialized banking app designed for the 661 demographic. This app automatically calculates his support obligations in real time, based on his fluctuating gig economy income. It takes a small percentage of every transaction as a service fee to ensure he remains in compliance with the state's automated enforcement triggers. Robert pays for the peace of mind that his driver's license won't be suspended by an algorithm. He is essentially paying a private company to protect him from the state's own efficiency. The cultural impact of this is the normalization of the permanent dependent. In 2026, the American middle class is being trained to view their domestic history as a portfolio that requires professional management. Case studies from the legal industry show that firms are moving away from the billable hour for trials and moving toward retainer-based life management. For a monthly fee, a law firm provides Julian, Marcus, or Chloe with ongoing access to legal updates, document storage, and conflict mitigation services. The goal is to keep the individual in the system. The industry has discovered that the long-tail revenue from a managed divorce is significantly higher than the one-time fee of a high-conflict litigation. Furthermore, we must address the gamification of the American split. In 2026, some of these subscription platforms have introduced cooperation scores. Parents receive badges or higher trust ratings based on how quickly they respond to requests or how accurately they track expenses. These scores are being marketed to family courts as an objective measure of parental fitness. Imagine a scenario where a parent's custody time is influenced by a proprietary algorithm's harmony rating. This isn't science fiction. It is the logical conclusion of a society that has replaced judicial discretion with data-driven metrics. The U.S. public is being pushed into a performance-based parenting model, where the judge is an AI and the courtroom is an app. The data suggests that this creates a new form of digital inequality. Those who can afford the premium tiers of these services have access to legal health tools that keep them out of court. Those who cannot afford the subscriptions are left to navigate the legacy state systems, which are increasingly underfunded and slower. The potential outcomes include a two-tiered justice system, a streamlined, automated, and subscription-managed experience for the affluent, and a chaotic, high-friction, and punitive experience for the working class. In 2026, the 661 framework has inadvertently created a wealth gap in the quality of one's post-divorce peace. Step by step, the industry is also colonizing the emotional recovery phase. In the United States, we are seeing the rise of divorce coaches, who operate through subscription apps, providing 24/7 access to text-based support. While this may seem helpful, it represents the final stage of the medicalization we discussed in Part 6. Every aspect of the human experience, from the legal filing to the emotional fallout, is being broken down into a marketable service. We are seeing a move away from community-based support toward professionalized, fee-based interactions. The cultural impact is a thinning of the American social fabric, where the advice of a friend is replaced by the programmed response of a success coach. Case studies of the forever client model reveal that some individuals in 2026 have been paying these subscriptions for over a decade. They have become so integrated into the digital infrastructure of their divorce that the idea of opting out is terrifying. If they cancel the service, they lose the data logs that protect them in court. If they stop the payments, they lose the buffer between themselves and an angry former spouse. They are, in every sense of the word, subscribers to their own sanity. The American family has been unbundled, and in its place we have a series of recurring line items on a credit card statement. This is the ultimate victory of the 661 era. The transformation of a social crisis into a sustainable business model. We have replaced the broken home with the managed household, and the cost of entry is a lifetime of participation in the machine. But as we look toward the final chapters of this masterclass, we have to confront the most uncomfortable truth of all. While we have been focusing on the adults, the Julians, the Chloes, and the Marcuses, a new generation is watching. They are the first generation to grow up in a world where a parent's love is mediated by an app, and a family's budget is managed by an enforcement algorithm. What happens when these children, the digital natives of divorce, reach adulthood? What will their relationships look like when they have been raised in a culture of contractual sustainability, rather than covenantal commitment? In Part 9, we are looking at the evolution of the American heir. We are going to explore how the 661 era has fundamentally altered the concept of inheritance, loyalty, and the future of the American family unit. If you thought this was just about the people in the room, you aren't ready for what comes next. We are looking at the end of the traditional family tree as we know it. The evolution of the American heir is the final frontier of the divorce 661 cultural shift, and in 2026, we are witnessing the emergence of a generation whose very concept of lineage has been digitized, fragmented, and reorganized. When we talk about the end of the traditional family tree, we are referring to the transition from a vertical, linear progression of wealth and values to a horizontal, distributed network of interests. The American public in 2026 is grappling with a reality where the legacy of a family is no longer found in a single home or a shared surname, but in a series of legal partitions and digital archives. To understand the step-by-step breakdown of this generational shift, let us look at the concept of fractional inheritance. Imagine a character named Leo. Leo is 24 years old, living in a high-rent district in Denver. He is a product of the peak divorce 661 era. Throughout his childhood, Leo lived in 4 different households due to the remarriages and subsequent second splits of his parents. In 2026, Leo does not view inheritance as a singular event involving a family estate. Instead, he views it as a complex web of potential outcomes. He is an heir to his father's 401k, his stepfather's digital media collection, and his mother's fractional real estate holdings in a diversified trust. Historical trends indicate that this fragmentation of assets is leading to a decline in the classic American family business. When a household splits under the streamlined 661 framework, the primary focus is the immediate equitable distribution of liquid or semi-liquid assets. This often means selling off the family firm or the long-held property to satisfy the court's demand for a clean break. For Leo, this means there is no ground zero for his identity. He is a stakeholder in multiple entities but a master of none. The cultural impact is a generation of young Americans who are economically mobile but emotionally untethered, viewing their family history as a series of balance sheets, rather than a narrative of continuity. Now, let us examine the rise of the contractual sibling. In 2026, the United States has seen a massive increase in blended families. Through the lens of case studies, we see that children like Leo often grow up with half-siblings and step-siblings who are legally connected for a decade and then, following another 661 style filing, are legally severed. The law treats these relationships as temporary contractual associations. When the support order ends or the remarriage dissolves, the legal obligation to maintain the sibling bond often vanishes. The potential outcomes for the American social fabric are significant. We are producing a cohort of adults who view family as a revolving door of characters determined by a court order rather than a permanent blood bond. Furthermore, we must address the digitization of ancestry. In 2026, the traditional family Bible or photo album has been replaced by the court-monitored apps we discussed in Part 8. For Leo, his childhood memories are stored in the servers of a third-party corporation that managed his parents' parallel parenting schedule. If he wants to know why he missed a specific holiday in 2018, he doesn't ask his parents. He looks at the archived log of disputes that is part of his family's digital decree. The cultural impact is the cold medicalization of memory. We have turned the family story into a searchable database of grievances and compliance checks. This brings us to the evolution of the prenuptial mindset in the American heir. Having watched the efficiency and the surveillance of the 661 era, young Americans in 2026 are entering their own relationships with a level of cynicism that researchers call relational risk management. They aren't just looking for love. They are looking for a partner whose digital and financial risk profile matches their own. We are seeing a trend where young couples exchange digital health certificates, audits of their support obligations, credit scores, and legal histories before they even consider moving in together. The family tree is being replaced by a family flowchart, where every branch is vetted for its potential to trigger a legal or financial cascade. Let us look at the case study of the trust fund triage. In 2026, estate planners are increasingly dealing with what they call the 661 clause. This is a provision in a will that automatically reorganizes a child's inheritance if they enter into a high-risk domestic situation. Parents who went through the 661 grinder are now using their wealth to control the next generation's marital outcomes. They are creating incentive-based trusts that pay out only if the heir maintains a specific type of domestic stability or utilizes a specific firm for their own prenuptial agreements. This is the ultimate subscription to sanity, reaching across generations. The managed family has become the managed legacy. Step by step, the U.S. public is moving toward a post-nuclear reality. The data shows that in 2026, the multi-generational household is returning, but not out of a sense of tradition. It is returning as a defensive economic maneuver for the divorced American and their children. We see Leo moving back in with his father, who is also a solo senior post-split, to pool resources against the rising cost of the managed life. This is not the Waltons' version of the American family. It is a tactical alliance between two individuals who have been processed by the same machine. The cultural impact on loyalty is perhaps the most profound change. In a world where the state can intercept your wages and an app can monitor your tone, the concept of unconditional loyalty begins to erode. For the 2026 American, loyalty is increasingly conditional on the terms of the agreement. We are seeing a shift in the American psyche where the contract has replaced the covenant. If the contract is breached, the loyalty is retracted. This is the mindset that the 661 era has institutionalized. And it is the mindset that the heirs are taking into the voting booths, the boardrooms, and the nurseries of the future. We are witnessing the birth of the modular family. In this model, individuals can be swapped in and out based on their contribution to the household stability and compliance with the algorithm. It is an incredibly efficient system for a hyper-capitalist society, but it leaves a void in the human experience that no software update can fill. Leo and his peers are the architects of a new America, one that is highly transparent, legally precise, and remarkably lonely. As we reach this point in our deep dive, we have to look at the final piece of the puzzle. We have seen the legal shifts, the economic extractions, the medical fallout, and the digital haunting. We have seen how it has changed our children and our futures. But there is one final question. What is the end game for the United States? Is the 661 framework a sign of a society that has finally found a way to handle human failure with dignity? Or is it the blueprint for a civilization that has given up on the idea of the permanent union altogether? In the final part of this masterclass, we are pulling all the threads together. We are going to look at the national security of the heart, why the US government is so invested in the way we break up, and the shocking predictions for what the American family will look like in the year 2050. We are going to reveal the secret demographic pivot that is driving these legal reforms behind the scenes. If you want to know where we are really headed, Part 10 is the only map you need. Prepare for the final revelation of the 661 era. The national security of the heart represents the final layer of our deep dive, where we move from individual tragedy to the survival of the American state. In 2026, the United States government views the stability and structure of the domestic unit not just as a matter of personal choice, but as a critical infrastructure concern. The 661 era of streamlined divorce is the legal manifestation of a broader demographic pivot. For decades, the U.S. economic model relied on a traditional nuclear family to drive consumption, labor participation, and population growth. However, as we look toward the year 2050, the data suggests that the state is shifting its priority from preserving the union to managing the dissolution. This is a strategic move to ensure that even as the family breaks, the economic output of the individual remains uninterrupted. To understand the step-by-step logic behind this pivot, let us look at the concept of labor fluidity. In the pre-661 era, a high-conflict multi-year divorce was a massive drag on the American economy. It kept highly skilled workers like Marcus, Chloe, or Julian trapped in legal limbo, often unable to relocate for better opportunities or too distracted to maintain peak productivity. By 2026, the implementation of streamlined, remote, and AI-driven processes has effectively removed the friction from the exit. The government's interest here is clear. A worker who can process their divorce in 90 days via a digital portal is a worker who stays in the tax bracket. We have moved from a society that subsidized staying together to a state that optimizes moving on. Historical trends show that the U.S. Treasury loses billions annually in collateral divorce costs, ranging from lost tax revenue to the increased burden on public health systems. The 661 framework is a fiscal defensive maneuver. By automating enforcement and standardizing alimony through the algorithms we discussed in Part 4, the state ensures that the financial burden of a split remains a private liability. Imagine a scenario where the government no longer cares if you are married, as long as your support compliance score remains high. In 2026, we are seeing the decoupling of the American dream from the white picket fence and the reattachment of that dream to individual financial resilience. Case studies from federal demographic reports indicate that by the year 2050, the solo household will become the dominant demographic in the United States. This is the demographic pivot in action. The 661 era is preparing the legal and social infrastructure for a nation of individuals who engage in serial commingling rather than lifelong partnerships. The state is investing in high-density housing, specialized single-payer insurance models, and the managed matrimony apps we explored in Part 8 to support this new social architecture. The goal is to ensure that the end of the family does not lead to the end of the economy. Furthermore, we must address the algorithmic parenting as a matter of national security. In 2026, the U.S. government is concerned about the psychological resilience of the next generation, the heirs we discussed in Part 9. The move toward parallel parenting and court-monitored communication is an attempt to reduce the ACE score, adverse childhood experiences, of the population. The logic is clinical. If the state cannot prevent the divorce, it must sanitize the conflict to ensure the future workforce is not biologically compromised by the chronic stress we saw in Chloe's case. This is the medicalization of matrimony, reaching its logical conclusion at the federal level. Imagine if, in the year 2050, your marriage license is not a permanent contract but a renewable domestic permit. This is the direction the data is pointing. We are moving toward a model where relationships are periodically reviewed by AI mediators to ensure they remain economically and psychologically viable. If the metrics fall below a certain threshold, the 661-style automated dissolution is triggered as a matter of course to prevent social degradation. The U.S. public is being groomed for a future where the state acts as the ultimate supervisor of all domestic contracts, ensuring that no individual becomes an economic sinkhole due to a failing relationship. The potential outcomes for American culture are a total shift in the meaning of loyalty. In this 2050 projection, loyalty is not to a person but to the process. We are being trained to trust the algorithm, the surveillance web, and the subscription model more than we trust each other. This is the shadow economy of Part 3 becoming the standard economy. The wealth extraction that occurs during a split is no longer an anomaly. It is a recurring feature of the American life cycle. Each transition, from marriage to divorce to remarriage, is a transaction that feeds the GDP. Step by step, we have built a system that is perfectly designed to survive the death of the family. But as we close this masterclass, we have to face the ultimate revelation. The 661 era was never about making divorce easier for you. It was about making you more manageable for the system. We have traded the messy, unpredictable bonds of the heart for the clean, searchable data points of the state. The American family hasn't just changed. It has been uploaded into a system where it can be monitored, taxed, and liquidated with the click of a button. For the American viewer in 2026, the question is no longer, how do I save my marriage? Or, how do I survive my divorce? The question is, how do I maintain my humanity in a system that views my relationships as a risk assessment exercise? We are the pioneers of a new way of being human, one where our most intimate moments are governed by a subscription to sanity, and our legacy is a fractional inheritance. As you look at your own life, your own bank account, and your own children, remember that you are more than a compliance score. You are the biological and emotional heart of a nation that is currently undergoing its most radical transformation since the Industrial Revolution. The 661 era is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the next version of the American experiment. But even as we finish this deep dive into the legal and cultural fallout, a new shadow is forming on the horizon. While we have focused on the internal security of the family, the external forces are moving in. There is a growing trend of transnational divorce, where global jurisdictions are clashing over the very assets and children we have been discussing. What happens when the 661 algorithm meets a legal system that doesn't recognize its authority? The conversation doesn't end here. The machinery of the world continues to turn, and the data for the next decade is already being gathered. We have shown you the map of the 661 era, but the borders are shifting every single day. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and most importantly, stay human in the age of the algorithm. The next evolution of the American split is already in the beta testing phase.